Nurse Thorne adjusted the drip rate on bed 4. The IV pump beeped its placid electronic rhythm, a stark contrast to the controlled chaos of the Mercy General Emergency Department. Her movements were fluid, economical, not a single wasted motion. She charted the change on the tablet, her face a mask of professional neutrality. Thorne. The voice was sharp, edged with the chronic impatience of a man who believed his time was more valuable than anyone else's. She turned. Dr. Mark Cross, Chief of Trauma Surgery, stood with his arms crossed, a clipboard clutched in one hand like a weapon. His eyes, magnified slightly by his expensive glasses, scanned her work with overt skepticism. "Is there a problem, Doctor?" she asked, her voice even. "The problem," he said, tapping a pen against the clipboard, "is that you're new, and you're slow. We have a 6-car pileup on the interstate, and I need nurses who can anticipate, not just react." It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Eris Thorne simply nodded. "I'll be faster." "See that you are." He spun on his heel and stalked toward the main trauma bay, his white coat billowing behind him like a cape. She watched him go, her expression unchanging. She had been called many things in her life. Slow had never been one of them. She was methodical. She was precise. There was a universe of difference, a difference measured in millimeters of steel and seconds of blood loss. A difference Dr. Cross, in his pristine, predictable world, could never comprehend. The first wave of patients from the pileup arrived moments later. A symphony of sirens, shouting and groaning filled the air. Aris moved into the fray, a quiet island of calm in a sea of panic. She triaged, she placed lines, she administered meds, all with that unnerving efficiency. She was good. Too good, some of the other nurses whispered. She had an instinct for it, an almost preternatural ability to see the next complication before it happened. But she was also distant, a ghost in blue scrubs who clocked in, did her job flawlessly, and clocked out without a single personal word. An hour into the controlled bedlam, they brought him in. He was different from the others. The paramedics were tense, their voices tight. Male, mid-30s, single-occupant vehicle, ejected. GCS of 8, hypotensive, tachycardic. Multiple penetrating injuries, unknown origin. Aris saw it instantly. It wasn't glass. It wasn't twisted metal from the car. The fragmentation pattern was all wrong. The wounds were tight, deep, viciously precise. Ball bearings, an improvised explosive device. She felt a cold dread wash over her, a ghost memory of sand, sun, and the smell of cordite. They wheeled him into Trauma Bay 1. Dr. Cross was already there, barking orders. "Get me a chest tube tray, type and cross for 6 units, stat. I want a fast scan now." Aris was already moving, her hands finding the familiar landmarks on the man's chest. She ignored the chaos, her focus narrowing to the patient on the gurney. His face was a mask of blood and dirt, but there was something about the set of his jaw, the hard lines of muscle under the torn fatigues he wore beneath a civilian jacket. The ultrasound probe slid over his abdomen. "Free fluid in Morrison's pouch," the resident called out. "He's bleeding out." "No kidding," Cross snapped. "Prep him for an X-lap. We're going straight to the OR." "Wait," Aris said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a scalpel. Cross froze, turning to glare at her. "Excuse me, nurse. Did you say something?" "His breath sounds are absent on the left," she said, her stethoscope still pressed to the man's chest. "And his trachea is deviated. It's not just the abdominal bleed. He has a tension pneumothorax, a massive one." "I'll get to it," Cross said dismissively. "The belly is the priority. Massive transfusion protocol now." "He won't make it to the OR," Aris stated, her eyes locked on the monitor. The patient's oxygen saturation was plummeting. 80%. 75. "His heart is being crushed. He has minutes, maybe less. I am the chief of trauma, Cross said, his voice low and dangerous. You are a nurse. You will do as you are told, or you will get out of my trauma bay. What would you do in her position? Follow the chain of command, or trust your gut and risk everything? The patient's eyes fluttered open, just for a second. They were unfocused, clouded with pain, but they found hers. A flicker of recognition. His lips moved, a faint, rasping sound escaping. Spectre. The call sign hit her like a physical blow, a name she hadn't heard in 5 years, a name she had buried under layers of sterile procedure and anonymity. In that instant, Nurse Thorne vanished. Dr. Eris Thorne, call sign Spectre, former lead surgeon of a Tier 1 JSOC surgical team, took her place. Get me a number 10 scalpel and a chest tube, she commanded. Her voice had changed. It was no longer quiet. It was steel. It was absolute authority, forged in the crucible of places that didn't appear on any map. The entire room went silent. The other nurses, the residents, even Dr. Cross, stared at her as if she had grown a second head. Now, she repeated, her gaze unwavering. I will have your license for this, Cross hissed, his face purple with rage. You can have it, she shot back, her hands already moving, grabbing the scalpel from a stunned surgical tech. But you will have it after I save your patient's life. You're looking for a bleed in his belly while he's dying from a collapsed lung and cardiac tamponade. You're looking at the wrong war. The patient's heart rate on the monitor went erratic. Ventricular tachycardia. He was crashing hard. He's coding, a resident yelled. He's not coding. He's obstructed, Aris corrected without looking up. No amount of CPR will fix this. Scalpel. Her hand shot out, and the tech, mesmerized, placed the instrument in her palm. Without hesitation, she made a swift, deep incision between the man's 4th and 5th ribs. There was no anesthetic, no time. It was brutal, primal, and utterly necessary. A geyser of dark blood and air erupted from the wound. The hissing sound was audible over the beeping of the failing monitors. The numbers on the screen flickered. The deadly rhythm of V-Toch broke. His oxygen saturation, which had dropped into the 60s, began to climb. 70, 80, 90%. The room was breathless. That's a field thoracostomy, Cross whispered, his arrogance draining away, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. Nobody does that here. It's a butcher's move. Where I come from, Eris said, her hands already working, inserting the chest tube with practiced ease. It's the difference between a body bag and a helicopter ride home. He's stabilizing, for now. She looked up, meeting Cross's stunned gaze. His name is Master Chief Petty Officer Elias Vance. He took 3 rounds for me outside of Kandahar. The fragmentation in his chest is from the same IED that killed the rest of my team. Now, are you going to stand there and watch? Or are you going to help me get the rest of these ball bearings out of him before they tear his aorta to shreds? The question hung in the air, a challenge and an indictment. Dr. Mark Cross, for the first time in his professional life, was speechless. He simply stared at the quiet, unassuming nurse who had just performed a procedure out of a combat medicine textbook, a woman who had just saved a man he had been about to let die. Watch me, Arias said, her voice dropping to a low, intense hum. And they did. They all did. She took command of the room as if born to it. Her quiet confidence was gone, replaced by an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. I need a clamshell tray, a giggly saw, and a vascular set. And get the cell saver ready. We're going to be chasing bleeders all the way to his spine. Not a question, a statement. The surgical tech, a young woman named Maria, just nodded, her eyes wide, and scrambled to assemble the requested equipment. The residents, who had been frozen in place, snapped to attention. ready to follow the orders of this nurse, who was suddenly more of a commander than their own chief. "You can't do a clamshell thoracotomy in the ER," Cross finally managed to say, his voice strained. "The sterility, the risk of infection." "The risk of him being dead in the next 5 minutes is greater," Aris countered, not even gracing him with a glance. Her entire being was focused on Vance. "His pericardium is filling. That first gush of blood wasn't just from the pneumo. He's got a penetrating cardiac injury. The fast scan missed it because the pressure in his chest was too high. I'm not asking for your input, Cross. I'm telling you what's happening." She was right. The monitor confirmed it. Vance's blood pressure, which had briefly stabilized, was cratering again. His heart sounds, when a resident listened, were muffled and distant. Classic signs of cardiac tamponade. She had seen it from breath sounds and a deviated trachea alone. She had diagnosed it through the noise and the chaos, a complex, cascading failure that he, with all his diagnostic tools, had completely missed. The arrogance was gone from his face now. In its place was a dawning horror, and something else. Awe. "Help her!" Cross ordered the room, his voice hoarse. "Give her whatever she asks for." He then stepped up to the gurney opposite her. "What do you need me to do?" Aris finally looked at him, her eyes holding his for a long, searching moment. She saw the surrender there, the admission of his failure and her expertise. She gave a curt nod. "Keep his airway clear and manage the transfusion. I'll handle the plumbing." For the next 40 minutes, Trauma Bay 1 was transformed into something else entirely. It was no longer a civilian ER. It was a forward surgical unit in the heart of a war zone, and Aris was its commanding officer. With a speed and precision that defied belief, she performed the emergency thoracotomy. She connected the 2 incisions with a transverse cut across the sternum. Using the giggly saw, a flexible wire saw used for bone, she cut through Vance's breastbone with a sickening, grating sound. She cracked his chest open like a book. The site within was a butcher's block. Blood filled the cavity. The left lung was collapsed and torn. But it was the heart that drew her eye. Beating weakly inside its sac, the pericardium, which was stretched taut and bruised a deep, dark purple. "There," she said, pointing with a clamp. "Pericardial tamponade. The sac is full of blood, strangling the heart." She incised the pericardium carefully. A torrent of dark, clotted blood spilled out, and the heart, freed from the pressure, leaped in his chest, beating with renewed vigor. The blood pressure on the monitor jumped 20 points. A collective sigh of relief went through the room. "Don't celebrate yet," Aris warned, her hands a blur of motion, suctioning blood, placing clamps. "We just bought time. Now we find the hole." She found it a moment later. A tiny, lethal piece of metal, a ball bearing from the IED, had torn through the right ventricle. It was a 1 in a million shot. A death sentence. "Plegited suture," she commanded. Maria slapped it into her hand. With a surgeon's delicate touch, she placed the stitches, her fingers working deep inside the chest of the man on the table. She worked around the beating heart, her movements timed to its rhythm. It was a dance of life and death, performed on the edge of a knife. She placed the final stitch and tied it off. The bleeding stopped. Just like that. It stopped. She spent another 20 minutes meticulously searching for other injuries, repairing a tear in the lung, and retrieving 2 more pieces of shrapnel lodged dangerously close to the subclavian artery. When she was finished, the chest cavity was clean, the bleeding controlled. "We can close him up and move him to the ICU," she announced, finally stepping back from the table. Her blue scrubs were soaked in blood. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with an intense, fierce light. The room was silent, save for the steady, rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor. The sound of a life saved. The sound of an impossible feat accomplished. Elias Vance was stable. He was alive. Dr. Cross just stared, first at the monitor, then at Vance's open chest, then at Aris. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He seemed to be searching for words that were wholly inadequate. Finally, he found them. "I've never seen anything like that," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The speed, the precision. I would have killed him. I was going to take him to the OR for his belly, and he would have died on the table." He looked at her, his eyes stripped of all pretense. "Who are you?" "I'm the nurse you told to be faster," she replied, her voice flat. She began peeling off her bloody gloves. The adrenaline was fading, and in its place came a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. And something else. Fear. The quiet, cold fear she had lived with for 5 years. She had just lit a beacon in the dark. Spectre was no longer a ghost, and ghosts, once seen, could be hunted. The hospital administrator, a man named Henderson with a perpetually worried expression, arrived flanked by 2 members of the board. They had been summoned by Cross. Henderson's face went pale when he saw the scene in Trauma Bay 1. It looked less like a medical procedure and more like the aftermath of a battle. "What in God's name happened here?" he demanded. "A miracle, Mr. Henderson," Cross said, his voice ringing with a conviction that startled everyone. "A miracle performed by Nurse Thorne." He then proceeded to recount the events, holding nothing back. He detailed his own misdiagnosis, his dismissal of Aris's concerns, and her subsequent, unauthorized, and brilliant intervention. Henderson's expression shifted from shock to bureaucratic horror. She did what? A nurse performed an open-heart procedure? In the ER, without attending privileges? Without even being a doctor on staff? "She saved his life," Cross insisted. "A life I would have lost." "She broke every rule in the book," Henderson sputtered, his face flushing. "Every protocol, every bylaw. The liability. My God, the liability." Aris stood silently through the entire exchange. She had known this was coming. It was the price of saving Elias. "Nurse Thorne," Henderson said, turning to her, his voice dripping with a mixture of fury and fear. "You are to surrender your hospital ID. You are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full board review. Security will escort you from the premises." She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply stripped off her scrubs, revealing the plain t-shirt and jeans she wore underneath, and handed her badge to the waiting security guard. As they led her away, she glanced back at Elias Vance. He was being prepped for transport to the ICU, alive because she had broken the rules. It was worth it. It had to be. I walked out of the hospital and into the cool night air, the automatic door sliding shut behind me, sealing me off from the world I had just upended. Suspended. It was almost funny. 5 years of hiding, of being meticulously invisible, and it all came crashing down in 40 minutes. I had traded my anonymity for a man's life. I'd make that trade again. Every single time. But as I walked toward the bus stop, a familiar cold dread crept up my spine. It wasn't the board review I was afraid of. It was the fact that for the first time in 5 years, someone had called me Spectre. And that name, whispered in a hospital in the middle of America, was louder than any gunshot. It was a signal flare. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that something was coming for me. 2 days passed in a blur of silence. Aris stayed in her small, sparsely furnished apartment, waiting. The hospital hadn't called. She expected a certified letter informing her of her termination and the impending lawsuit. It was the logical, procedural next step. But the letter never came. Instead, on the 3rd morning, they did. She saw them from her window. 2 black sedans, government plates, tinted windows. They parked across the street, men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerging from each vehicle. They didn't look at her building. They didn't have to. They were just the perimeter. Her phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. She answered. "Dr. Thorne," a voice said. It was smooth, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. "We need to have a conversation." It wasn't a request. Back at Mercy General, Dr. Mark Cross was in the middle of a heated argument with Henderson in the administration wing. "You can't fire her," Cross insisted, his fists planted on the polished mahogany of Henderson's desk. "You should be giving her a medal. That man, Master Chief Vance, is sitting up in the ICU talking to his family. He's alive because of her." "She's a catastrophic liability, Mark," Henderson countered, rubbing his temples. "She's not even on our surgical roster. For all we know, her credentials are fake. We're running them now. But her file is a ghost. A nursing degree from a community college, a license in good standing, and before that, nothing. 5 years of nothing." "I don't care if she got her degree from a vending machine," Cross shot back. "I know what I saw. I've been a surgeon for 25 years. What she did, it wasn't just medicine. It was art. It was instinct. You can't teach that. You can't even define it. To fire a talent like that is not just stupid. It's malpractice." Their argument was interrupted by Henderson's executive assistant, a woman who looked permanently flustered. Today, she looked terrified. "Mr. Henderson," she stammered. "There are gentlemen here to see you." The door opened before Henderson could respond. 2 men in suits, identical to the ones outside Eris's apartment, stepped into the office. They moved with a quiet, predatory grace that did not belong in a hospital. One of them held up a leather wallet, flashing credentials that were stark, black, and utterly intimidating. "Mr. Henderson, Dr. Cross," the lead man said, his voice the same one Aris had heard on the phone. "My name is Director Sterling. We need to discuss an asset of ours currently in your employ. Her name is Eris Thorne." The meeting lasted for 20 minutes. When Sterling and his man left, Henderson was ashen-faced. Cross looked utterly bewildered. "What the hell was that?" Cross asked. Henderson sank into his chair, looking at a single sheet of paper Sterling had left on his desk. It was a directive, stamped with seals Cross had only ever seen in movies. "Her suspension is lifted," Henderson said, his voice a hollow echo in the room. "Effective immediately." "What? Why? I can't tell you." "What do you mean you can't tell me?" Cross demanded. "I mean," Henderson said, looking up, his eyes wide with fear, "that the conversation we just had is classified. The file he gave me is classified. Her entire employment history is now classified. All I know is that Eris Thorne is to be given anything she needs, and we are to ask no questions." He paused, shaking his head in disbelief. "She broke every rule in the book. By morning, no one could explain why she still had a job." Eris met him in a sterile conference room on the hospital's executive floor. Director Sterling sat at the head of the long table, his hands folded. He looked more like a corporate CEO than a government spook, but his eyes were ancient and cold. They held the chilling calm of a man who wielded immense power without remorse. "Eris," he began, as if they were old friends. "You've been difficult to find." "That was the point," she replied, her posture rigid, her hands resting in her lap. She would show no weakness. "Hiding in plain sight. A nurse. It was clever, I'll admit," Sterling said with a thin smile. "But a spotlight always finds talent of your caliber. Cracking a man's chest open in the ER tends to draw attention. He was my patient. He was dying. He was your former teammate," Sterling corrected gently. "A loose end, one you were never meant to see again. His survival is inconvenient." The casual cruelty of the statement hung in the air. "Why are you here, Sterling?" Eris asked, cutting to the chase. "The blackout protocol has been reactivated," he said. "We need you back. We need Spectre." The name again. It tasted like ash in her mouth. The Blackout Protocol. A name for a program so deep, so dark, its very existence was a myth even within the intelligence community. A team of deniable operators, a surgeon, a sniper, a tech specialist, tasked with missions that existed in the moral gray spaces where nations waged their secret wars. "Spectre is dead," Arisu said. "She died in Kandahar, along with the rest of her team." Sterling leaned forward, his smile gone. "That's the story you tell yourself, isn't it? The noble tragedy. You, the lone survivor, burdened by the guilt of a mission gone wrong. The explosion, the ambush, the patients you couldn't save." "I was the surgeon in charge," she said, her voice tight. "Their deaths are on me." "And that is where your memory fails you," Sterling said, sliding a tablet across the table. "You were so busy patching up the wounded, you never stopped to ask why the ambush was so perfect. Why the enemy knew exactly where you would be and when." He tapped the screen. A satellite image appeared, showing the dusty compound where her team had been slaughtered. Red circles highlighted enemy positions. Blue icons marked her team's location. It was a perfect kill box. "The mission wasn't to save the informant, Eris," Sterling said softly. "The mission was the informant. He was a high-value target who had turned. The ambush was our way of eliminating him without a diplomatic incident. Your team, they were an acceptable loss." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Acceptable loss. Her friends, her team. Men she had shared meals with, laughed with, bled with. Their lives had been a currency spent to buy a convenient death. "You sacrificed them," she whispered, the horror dawning. "You set us up." "We made a difficult choice for the greater good," Sterling corrected. "You were never meant to survive. When you did, you became a liability, a witness with a conscience. So we let you run. We let you bury yourself under a mountain of guilt, assuming you'd never surface again. But you did." I stared at the tablet, at the cold, clinical graphics depicting the murder of my family. The guilt I had carried for 5 years, the weight that had crushed the life out of me, wasn't mine. It was a lie. A carefully constructed cage to keep me broken. My failure wasn't that I couldn't save them. My failure was that I had trusted the men who sent us there. He thought this revelation would break me. He thought it would make me compliant. He was wrong. It didn't break me. It ignited something. The ghost in the scrubs was gone. The haunted surgeon was gone. All that was left was a cold, burning rage. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "I want you back," Sterling said. "Your unique skills are needed for a new operation. You will be reinstated at your former rank, with full operational command of your own unit." "And if I refuse?" Sterling's expression hardened. "Then your existence becomes a problem we have to solve. Your file will be leaked, the one that paints you as a rogue surgeon who suffered a psychotic break after the Kandahar incident, the one that implicates you in the deaths of your team. You'll spend the rest of your life in a military prison, or you'll have a tragic accident. Your choice." It was a checkmate. He had her trapped. Run and be hunted. Stay and be a pariah. Or join him and become a monster. The door to the conference room opened. Dr. Cross stood there, his face a mask of grim determination. Behind him were 2 hospital security guards. "Director Sterling," Cross said, his voice steady. "This is a sterile executive area. I'm going to have to ask you and your men to leave." Sterling raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his cold eyes. "And who, may I ask, are you?" "I'm this hospital's chief of trauma, and Dr. Thorne," he said, emphasizing the title, "is my colleague. This conversation is over." Sterling chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "You have no idea what you're interfering with, Doctor." I know that a government thug is threatening one of my staff in my hospital, Cross countered. And it's not going to happen. Not on my watch. Eris looked at Cross, a flicker of surprise and gratitude breaking through her icy composure. He was standing up for her, with no knowledge of the stakes, armed with nothing but his own moral conviction. It was foolish. It was brave. It was human. This doesn't concern you, Cross, Eris said quietly. The hell it doesn't, he replied, not taking his eyes off Sterling. Get out. Sterling stood up slowly, smoothing his suit jacket. This changes nothing, Aris. You have 24 hours to report to the designated address, or the consequences will be severe for you and for anyone who stands in your way. He gave Cross a look that promised a world of pain, then turned and walked out of the room, his men falling in behind him like shadows. The room was silent for a long moment after they left. Are you all right? Cross finally asked, his concern genuine. No, she answered honestly, but I will be. She looked at him, the arrogant, by-the-book surgeon who had, in the span of 3 days, become her unlikely ally. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, he said grimly. I have a feeling our problems are just beginning. Now, tell me everything. And start with why a man with that kind of authority calls the best surgeon I've ever seen Spectre. She told him. Not everything, but enough. She told him about the military, the clandestine operations, the specialized surgical techniques born from the battlefield. She told him about Kandahar, about the guilt she had carried. She didn't tell him about Sterling's revelation. That truth was too raw, too dangerous. Cross listened without interruption, his expression growing more grave with each word. The world he knew, one of peer-reviewed studies and M&M conferences, was colliding with a shadow world of kill boxes and acceptable losses. So, you're not just a doctor, he said when she finished. You're a weapon. I was, she corrected. Now, I'm just a liability. And this man, Sterling, he's here to either recruit you or bury you? That's the choice he gave me. Cross paced the length of the conference room, running a hand through his hair. This is insane. We're a hospital. We save lives. We don't get involved in whatever this is. You're already involved, Aris pointed out. You stood up to him. The weight of that act seemed to settle on him. He stopped pacing and looked at her. What are you going to do? This was the question, wasn't it? The one that would define the rest of her life. Run again and spend her years looking over her shoulder? Surrender to Sterling and become the very thing she despised? Or fight? But how do you fight a ghost? What would you choose? A life on the run? A life in chains? Or a fight you can't possibly win? I'm not going with him, she said, the decision solidifying in her mind. And I'm done running. That leaves fighting, Cross stated. How do we do that? We're doctors, not spies. A plan began to form in Eris's mind, a desperate, audacious gamble. It was a long shot, a play born from the improvisational tactics of the battlefield. He thinks he has me trapped between 2 options, she said, thinking aloud. Join or die. But there's a third option. You don't win a war by playing on the enemy's terms. You change the battlefield. What are you talking about? Sterling's power comes from secrecy, she explained. His organization, the Blackout Protocol, it doesn't officially exist. They can't operate in the light. So, we're going to turn on the lights. She looked at Cross, her eyes alight with a dangerous fire he was beginning to recognize. He wants Spectre, she said. He can have her, but not as his weapon, as his surgeon. Right here. The 24 hours passed. Aris did not report to the address Sterling had given her. Instead, she went to the hospital. She put on a fresh set of scrubs, clipped on the new ID badge Henderson had personally delivered to her with a trembling hand, and walked into the ICU. Elias Vance was sitting up in bed, a chart resting on his lap. He looked pale and weak, but the soldier's spirit was bright in his eyes. He smiled when he saw her. "Spectre," he said, his voice raspy but strong. "Heard you got your wings clipped for saving my sorry ass. I'm grateful." "It was my pleasure, Master Chief," she said, pulling a chair to his bedside. "I need to ask you something. Kandahar, the ambush. Tell me everything you remember." Vance's smile faded. He recounted the day with a soldier's grim precision. The bad intelligence, the strange route they were ordered to take, the way the enemy seemed to be waiting for them. His story corroborated Sterling's. It was a setup. "There's something else," Vance said, his brow furrowed. "The informant. The guy we were supposed to extract. Just before the first RPG hit, I saw him. He wasn't scared. He was smiling, and he was holding a satellite phone." The final piece clicked into place. The informant hadn't just been the target. He had been the trigger. "Aris," Vance said, his voice dropping. "It wasn't your fault. We all knew it. We walked into a wood chipper. The brass fed us to them." "I know," she said. "And now the brass wants me back." Just then, her pager went off. A code blew. A new patient was coming in, critical. Gunshot wound to the chest. She and Cross met in the ER. The patient was a police officer, shot during a robbery. He was crashing fast. It was a mirror image of Vance's arrival, but this time, there was no argument. "He's got a hemothorax and he's tamponading," Cross said, looking at the ultrasound. "I need you." "Let's go to work," she replied. As they prepped the patient, Sterling and his men entered the ER. They didn't draw weapons. They simply stood by the entrance to the trauma bay, a silent, menacing presence. Sterling's face was unreadable, but his eyes promised retribution. He was here to collect. Aris ignored him. She and Cross worked in perfect sync, a seamless fusion of civilian protocol and battlefield innovation. They opened the officer's chest, repaired the damage, and stabilized him in record time. It was a master class in trauma surgery. When they were finished, Aris stripped off her gloves and faced Sterling, her scrubs once again stained with blood. "You had your chance," Sterling said, his voice dangerously low. "No," Aris countered, her voice clear and strong, ringing through the now silent EOPR. "You had yours. You could have left me alone. But you came here, to this place of healing, and you brought your war with you." She took a step forward. "You want to erase me? Go ahead, but you'll have to do it in front of them." She gestured to the nurses, the doctors, the patients. "You'll have to explain why you're silencing a surgeon who saves lives. Your power is in the dark, Sterling, and I'm standing in the light." It was a bluff, a colossal one. He could have his men kill everyone in the room and be gone in minutes. But it would be messy. It would draw attention. The one thing his shadow world couldn't afford. Sterling stared at her, a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not anger, not frustration. It was grudging respect. She had outmaneuvered him. She had changed the battlefield from a dark alley to a public square. "This isn't over," he hissed. "It is," she said. "You will provide Mercy General with a grant from one of your many shell corporations, a substantial one. It will be used to fund a new center for advanced trauma and veteran care. I will be its director. My work here will be my new mission. My team will be my surgeons. My operations will be saving lives, not taking them." "And why would I do that?" he asked, a sneer on his face. "Because the alternative is that I go public," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. "I will tell the world everything I know about the Blackout Protocol. I will give them names, dates, and mission parameters. I will expose the truth about Kandahar. It will be a scandal that will burn your entire world to the ground. You'll be able to silence me eventually, but you won't be able to silence the truth." She had him. and they both knew it. His greatest weapon, secrecy, was now her hostage. To keep his world hidden, he had to fund hers. He had to give her a place to exist, a legitimate, public role that made her too visible to simply disappear. Sterling stared at her for a long, silent minute. The gears of his cold, calculating mind were turning. He had come to collect an asset. Instead, she was dictating terms. Finally, he gave a single, sharp nod. "You'll have your funding, Dr. Thorne," he said, the name a concession, an admission of her victory. "But be warned, the world is a dangerous place. It would be a shame if something were to happen to the new director of such a promising program." It was a threat, but a hollow one. They both knew he couldn't touch her now. He turned and left, his men melting away with him. The darkness receded from the bright lights of the emergency room. Cross walked over to her, his face a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "Did you just blackmail a shadow government agency into funding a new hospital wing?" "I renegotiated my contract," she said with a faint smile. The next week, the first wire transfer arrived, an 8-figure sum from a defense contractor nobody had ever heard of. Henderson, armed with a new and profound fear of questioning anything Eris Thorne did, fast-tracked the proposal. The Mercy General Center for Advanced Trauma and Veteran Care was born. My new beginning. It wasn't the quiet, anonymous life I had sought, but it was something better. It was a purpose, forged from the ashes of my past. I wasn't Nurse Thorne, hiding from the world. I wasn't Spectre, a weapon in the dark. I was Dr. Eris Thorne, Director of Trauma. And for the first time in a very long time, I was whole. The final scene is not one of confrontation, but of creation. 6 months later, the new wing is open. It's a state-of-the-art facility, gleaming with the best technology money can buy. Aris stands in the primary trauma bay, not as an outcast nurse, but as its commander. She wears the dark blue scrubs of a chief surgeon, her name and new title stitched in white over her heart. Dr. Cross is by her side, no longer a skeptical superior, but a trusted partner. Her team, a hand-picked group of the best and brightest, moves with a quiet efficiency that mirrors her own. The call comes in. A helicopter, inbound. A soldier, wounded in a training exercise. Multiple GSWs, critical condition. Aris looks at her team, the same fire in her eyes they saw that first day. But now, it's not the desperate fire of a ghost fighting for a single life. It's the steady, burning flame of a leader. "All right, people," she says, her voice calm, confident, and ringing with absolute authority. "Let's go to work." She has integrated her past and her present, transforming the skills learned in the shadows of war into a beacon of hope and healing. She is no longer haunted by the ghosts of her past, but empowered by them, using their memory to fuel a new mission, on her own terms, in the light.